You're watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco. McLaren has improved astonishingly in 2023, transforming itself from a back-of-the-grid struggler to podium regular, but not, as yet, a Grand Prix winner. To have any chance of becoming a Red Bull beater next year and beyond, McLaren must hit what Lando Norris calls its next development target. But doing that will be easier said than done, given it requires McLaren to get on top of a persistent problem going back years. So what is this problem? Well, the short version is that the McLarens have been tricky to drive and inconsistent throughout Norris's 5 seasons with the team. He's not the only one who has said that, with teammate Oscar Piastri in complete agreement. And former McLaren racers Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo felt the same way, with Ricciardo struggling so much it almost ended his F1 career. Norris characterises the McLaren as being on a knife edge. If you can dance on that knife edge, the car is fast, but slip off it and it can make life very difficult. So whereas Max Verstappen appears able to use the Red Bull RB19 to bend the laws of physics to his command, Norris and Piastri are far less comfortable in the McLaren. That's why, while McLaren is still chasing more downforce, because downforce is still the primary performance driver in F1, the next target is to make the car easier to drive. Norris believes that McLaren needs to find that consistency if it's to really challenge Red Bull in the future. This problem has been a persistent one for McLaren, which has been one of the trickiest cars on the grid to drive for years. In particular in qualifying, that knife-edge quality has long been evident. This is combined with a sequence of cars that have generally been at their best in higher speed corners while struggling more in the lower speed. That's a trait McLaren has chipped away at over the years, but it's still evident in the fact that its current car is most effective in fast corners at tracks like Qatar and Suzuka. A succession of McLaren drivers have struggled with its knife-edge handling characteristics. Back in 2018, Stoffel Vandoorne was all at sea in a car that was difficult to drive. Then in the 2 years that followed, Norris and Sainz both commented on that trend. In 2020, Norris described the McLaren as one of the most difficult cars to drive in F1, and Sainz agreed. Norris talked about going a little bit over the edge and the car not being able to handle it. Then came Daniel Ricciardo, who described the handling traits as peculiar in 2021, characterising it as a puzzle to be solved. The car required an attacking approach in the braking zones rather than the style Ricciardo favoured of rolling the speed into the corner, and he struggled to adapt. As for Norris, he also favours that style but found it easier to make the necessary modifications. When I asked Norris in an interview at Interlagos late last year why he could get the most out of the car and Ricciardo couldn't, he suggested that it might be because he is happier on the knife edge and could deal with it better when slipping off it. Piastri has fared far better against Norris in qualifying than Ricciardo did, but he has offered similar feedback about how tricky the car is to drive, and both drivers have had qualifying laps this season where they have made small mistakes because of the knife edge behaviour. When McLaren made its first big step forward earlier this year, Norris characterised it as being only a 30% fix. That's because the car remained hard to drive. McLaren has proved it understands how to extract performance out of these cars with the massive gains it has made this year. That's why making it more drivable is such a key objective if it's to be able to take the fight to Red Bull in the future. So why does McLaren have this problem? Well, if I could answer that definitively, I'd probably be paid a lot of money by McLaren to fix it. However, it's a weakness McLaren has been aware of for a long time and been working at improving. It's fair to say that the results have been limited on that front so far. At the end of last year, McLaren team principal Andrea Stella suggested it was partly down to the characteristics of the wider Pirelli tyres. These were introduced way back in 2017, which broadly coincides with when McLaren started struggling with these traits. When the car is straight, the front tyres give sharp initial turn-in, but as the steering angle increases, that grip decreases, and it's not a linear relationship. And it's all about how your car characteristics mitigate that. And as Stella said, there's aspects of the McLaren that didn't mitigate this well. There have also been suggestions that it's an aerodynamic problem. Ricciardo certainly felt that aero dropouts, so sudden losses of load, contributed to the difficulties. Realistically, with the complexity of F1 cars, it's likely to be a combination of factors, and it's something that was seemingly made worse by the 2022 ground effect regulations, given this made the interaction of the mechanical platform and aero characteristics even more complicated thanks to the need to produce downforce across a wide range of ride heights. What really matters is whether McLaren understands the problem and the reasons for it. Without that understanding, a fix isn't possible. You could conclude that the team hasn't got to the bottom of the troubles given it has carried them for so long, but a decision was made to prioritise gaining downforce over fixing the characteristics with this year's car. Now, as Norris said, it's a target to improve the drivability. Stella doesn't expect much to change this year, but the hope is that the 2024 car will be different. F1 car design is a complicated business, so understanding and eliminating this problem is a difficult challenge. It will likely require a series of interconnected changes, all of which must not cost performance. As Norris puts it, it's a juggling act. He also admitted to not being confident in the past in McLaren's ability to make the right changes. Why would he have been, given it's a problem he characterises as blighting McLaren for the last 4 or 5 years? However, recent progress with the car means he now is confident that things will improve. And there's good reason for that. The progress made on performance shows McLaren has understood what is needed to make these cars work. It has also improved its tools significantly, with the new state-of-the-art wind tunnel up and running and its driver-in-loop simulator currently being broken in. Stella admits it won't be until the new car runs in testing in February that the team knows for sure if it has cracked it. But one thing can be counted on. If the drivability problems are still there, it will be very obvious to the drivers very quickly. A quick interruption to tell you about a new podcast we've been running as part of our F1 Tech Show feed. Aramco F1 Focus takes a look at F1 in a unique way to get you thinking about Grand Prix racing just a little bit differently. Host of the show, Tim Sylvie, is here to tell you more.
Thanks, Ed. Nicely teed up. The show, as you rightly say, aims to get the audience thinking about F1 slightly differently. We hit topics with fresh perspectives, performance insights, and statistical surprises.
And you're not alone behind the mic, so tell us about the experts that sit alongside you.
So the show's broken down into 3 focus areas. Performance, where racer and broadcaster Alex Brundle provides the perspective from behind the wheel. Then we have a stat focus with the stat man to the stars, Sean Kelly. And for the final piece, we bring in big and interesting names from F1 to get proper nerdy with the likes of F1 engineer Pat Simmons.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to hear a driver's and statistician's view. And with Sean's ridiculous brain, which appears to be made up of every F1 stat and piece of data in history, you'd be amazed how the guys can make an entire segment on winning from low grid slots not only fun to listen to, but downright insightful and educational. You might just learn a thing or two.
Kind words, Ed, kind words. So if you haven't tuned in yet, please do come and have a listen. And if you want to join the conversation and get a shout out on the show, tweet us at Aramco F1 Focus.
So, let's say McLaren flicks a switch with the 2024 car and it is, as Norris hopes, more drivable and less on a knife edge. Will that make it a Red Bull beater? Well, potentially. There's no way to predict the relative performance of next year's cars, but McLaren has proved beyond any doubt that it has a good handle on how to produce prodigious downforce with these cars consistently. There's still probably room for more gains in the lower speed corners, but that is coming. Its fundamental improvement this year has been remarkable. That was thanks to recognising a fundamental limitation in its floor design late last year, which led to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix upgrade. That added a little performance, but was the key concept change that created the foundation for the upgrades to come. The Austrian Grand Prix package that followed, augmented by a new front wing for the next race at Silverstone, made good on that promise. That's been built on with further changes, including a major package for the Singapore Grand Prix that introduced a wider waterslide in the side pods. The development has unquestionably worked, transforming a car that couldn't get out of Q1 in Miami in early May to one that claimed back-to-back double podiums in Japan and Qatar. Oh, and it was good enough to win the sprint race in Qatar with Piastri. It's almost certain that McLaren will overhaul Aston Martin in the fight for 4th in the Constructors' Championship. That seemed impossible just a few months ago, but McLaren has become a front-runner. It's now firmly in the group of teams from which it's hoped at least one can emerge to challenge Red Bull. So why not McLaren? It's got the drivers, the facilities, a strong technical team that's only going to get stronger when David Sanchez and Rob Marshall, 2/3 of the technical director triad alongside Peter Prodromou, arrive from Ferrari and Red Bull respectively. Given how good Red Bull is, having produced a car with enormous downforce levels across a range of conditions, and that is drivable, well, for Max Verstappen at least, it's no foregone conclusion McLaren will get on terms with it. But the very fact we're talking about McLaren as having any chance of fighting for wins, and maybe even a championship, just a few months after it appeared completely lost, tells you how seriously it should be taken. You can bet Red Bull will be looking over its shoulder, and McLaren's improvements has marked it out as a team to watch. Thanks for watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco.